picture is often unbelievable until we see it firsthand.
It just came down through this area, just like an ocean wave.
And my house was under 12 feet of water. And I've seen everybody, all my family has had destruction of their homes. It sounded like a big train whistle, and we were right underneath the front of it. I've never seen anything like it, and I don't want to again.
Tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, mudslides, earthquakes. We lump them together under the impersonal category of disasters, yet it's never that simple. There's always a personal side. Disasters disrupt lives. They change futures. They create situations which cry out for help. Since the mid-1950s, Church of the Brethren Disaster Response has been answering that cry. In 1973, Annual Conference created a structured program to organize the effort of workers who wanted to help by going directly to the scene of a disaster shortly after it occurs, to help clean up the debris and meet the immediate needs of the disaster victim, whether they be victims of the floodwaters of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or tornadoes in Wichita Falls, Texas, or the aftermath of Hurricane Frederick in Mobile, Alabama. Volunteers from churches across the denomination arrive to help clear the mud and pick up the shattered remnants of what used to be homes, providing a witness of Christ's love through a direct ministry. Gene Weil of the Conestoga, Pennsylvania church answered the call for volunteers at Wichita Falls, Texas. For 8 weeks, he helped people get back on their feet and begin to rebuild their lives. Oftentimes, he was met by skepticism.
A lady that I worked for in Wichita Falls said, "Why would anybody go this far? It would take 2-3 days to get here." And I said, "Well, maybe someday you can help somebody, and you will say, they came and helped me, I'm going to help them."
There are many ways to help, and the avenues to help are ever-changing. Through the years of responding to disasters, the Brethren have recognized a need that has been largely ignored by other disaster response agencies, the needs of children. The parent-child relationship is often one of the emotional casualties of a disaster, and that's where the Cooperative Disaster Child Care Program steps in. Begun originally as a Church of the Brethren program, it is now funded by many denominations and ministers to the special needs of the children, needs that often fall through the cracks. As soon as possible, trained volunteers set up a child care center, often in a Red Cross emergency shelter, where families are housed until other arrangements can be made. There, families who have a tremendous load on their minds, often in shock from what happened, can leave the care of their children if they want to someone else, allowing them to make housing arrangements and salvage items from their homes. At the centers, trained child care volunteers provide children the opportunity to express their fears and their joys. Painting is often a good way for children to channel their reactions to the emotional trauma they've been through. Lydia Walker is the director of the Cooperative Disaster Child Care Program.
They draw pictures of dark clouds in the sky and trees blowing over. They draw a picture of an animal that looks afraid. They won't admit that they're afraid, but they'll say that their pet is afraid. We never force the child to talk about their picture. But if they want to tell us about it, we do what we call reflective listening and play back to the child what they've said in other words so that it feels more like their own feelings.
Children at these centers also play with toys that help them work through their fears.
We have matchbox cars, steam shovels, bulldozers, ambulances, helicopters, and first aid and medical equipment. These kinds of things the children can relate to a great deal. And they love to make up stories using puppets replaying the disaster scene.
Although this ecumenical effort was established solely to minister to the needs of the children, it also ministers to parents, and even disaster caseworkers. Because when children are happy in a safe location under the loving care of trained volunteers, then parents can concentrate on filling out assistance forms. Noise in the center is reduced and anxiety is lowered all around. The child care program operates primarily during the time directly after a disaster strikes. That's also the time when most government help is available. But once the paperwork is filled out, the debris cleaned up, most disaster agencies leave. By now, the disaster is old news. Those unaffected by it soon put what happened out of mind. But for disaster victims, now often begins the worst of times. Hopelessness sets in. Questions arise. How am I going to rebuild? Most government response is geared toward helping a disaster victim back on his feet. But now there are steps to be taken. Steps toward returning to normal, toward rebuilding their damaged or destroyed home. There is uncertainty and a feeling that no one cares anymore. Perhaps the most vital ministry of the church occurs at this point. To remain or return to the disaster site and help in the long-term reconstruction of the community. It begins by Church of the Brethren Disaster Response organizing a crew of volunteer workers headed by a project director, working house by house to rebuild what was so suddenly and violently torn down. It includes skilled and non-skilled volunteers who repair or rebuild homes through the cooperation of local agencies. Often the government or Red Cross provides the material, the Brethren provide the labor. In the process, it provides much more. Randy and Sandy Hostler found that out in Jackson, Mississippi. Randy was a project director for the reconstruction of houses damaged by the spring floods that devastated 17 counties in southern Mississippi. They noticed that as people's houses began to take shape, so too did their lives. This house, belonging to a widow, had to be completely torn down. The flood had ripped the rotting timbers out from under it. But from the smoke of the burning debris came new hope. Hope not only for a place to live, but for the future as well. A future that had once appeared cloudy.
People seem to really be a lot happier and satisfied with themselves and at peace with, everything, I think. After they had a place to live.
They seem to have a lot more motivation or desire to. They weren't burdened down as much as they had been.
Volunteers with this aspect of disaster service do much more than hammer nails or paint walls. Their presence reassures the disaster victim that someone cares. This kind of work is not always measured by the number of houses that are rebuilt each week, because often a good disaster worker is also a good listener. Many times the homeowner just needs someone to talk to. There are stories to tell, horrors to be relived, dreams for the future that need reinforced. The presence of a caring listener is important, and the presence of a witnessing church is felt.
Some of what it did for them, just to listen to them, I think, to know that someone cared about them, I think that helped them. After we got to know them better, they did trust us and did feel comfortable with telling us about their, story. They saw their house improving, too, and I think that really helped them then, too.
As the hostlers and other volunteers work, they rebuild houses. But often as they work, they see lives salvaged as well. Lives that are sometimes shattered by the loss of a loved one or the loss of a home to a disaster. A rebuilt home is often a major step toward putting away the memory of what happened. But often it's difficult to get volunteers for this kind of long-term reconstruction. Yet Disaster Response Director Donna Durr says it's that long-term commitment that best tells the disaster victim that the church cares.
The real ministry of the church is for people to work with the disaster victims 6 months to a year following the disaster. It's during that time that the disaster victims tend to think that they've been forgotten, and it's the presence of our volunteers that says to them, hey, somebody still cares. And I think that the other thing is that by building a home, it's a lasting memorial to the disaster victim that someone stood by them in their time of need. That's a very strong physical witness of Christ at the disaster site.
Yet only a small fraction of the number of houses that could be built are built because of the shortage of volunteers, especially those involved in long-term recovery. But you don't have to travel hundreds of miles to help those stricken by disaster. There are other ways to help. For example, you can share in the day-to-day activities of someone else, a skilled volunteer, so he or she can travel to a disaster site. While others are volunteering time, you can care for their children, or do farm chores, mow the yard, or tend the garden. Either way, your help is always needed. It's also appreciated. One woman in Mississippi, whose home was rebuilt, wrote to the project director.
We thank you for rebuilding our home. I know that there was love in your hearts to come to a strange town, not knowing how people would react to you and helping people you didn't even know. Now I can really say that it is not what color you are. It's what's in your heart. The Lord will be with you always.
There is work to be done in many different places where people stricken by disaster cry out for help, and we as followers of Christ respond, many times to people who have nowhere else to turn.
I believe that some of them saw Christ in a way that they didn't see before. They've seen people come into their home, on their property, give of themselves, and build. And I think what they're seeing is a 20th century type miracle, that Christ does change lives. And when lives are changed, people do things differently. And one of the things they do differently, they do help people that are in trouble.
If you want to help further this 20th century miracle, contact your local church disaster coordinator, or you can write or call Church of the Brethren Disaster Response and become a living example of Christ's ministry to others.
When you see someone alone,